So here is our ultimate app goal that we're going to be building in the next videos or so. The idea here is that we're going to be able to create a very nice user interface, as you can see here. And the cool thing is we're going to be able to scroll left, and each time we scroll, we get a new quote. So this app is called Quotes App or Motivational App. Yeah, so it has very nice quotes from very smart people, philosophers and scientists such as Einstein here. Strive not to be a success, but rather to be of value. I quite like that one. So there are a lot of things that we're going to be learning along the way here, as well as solidifying what we already know so that we can hopefully move ourselves a little bit forward into building amazing user interfaces using SwiftUI, ultimately creating amazing applications. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, first things first, I went ahead and created a new project here. Go ahead and create a new project and name it Quotes or Motivation, whatever you want to name it. Okay, you should be able to do that by now. If not, just go ahead and say File, say Go to New, and go and say Project. Okay, very simple. Okay, so right away, of course, always gives us this default content view struct here, which when we run, we should see Hello World. And just to point out that you can actually get rid of all of this. And remember, this is just for the content view preview, which we're not going to be able to see here, because in this case here, I don't have Catalina macOS, which is the latest beta version running on my machine. But if you were brave enough to download Catalina on your machine, then this is fine, because that is what renders that simulator here. So as you change things, it just changes right away there, as opposed to running and then invoking the simulator. Very good. So at this point here, we can actually, it's safe to say, I'm going to just get rid of that, right? Because we don't need it at all. Very good. So if I go ahead and run this, of course, you're going to see that we will be seeing a very simple application here that should say Hello World. Oh, very nice. But it's not very helpful to us. What are we trying to do here? So what are we going to be building again is this sort of structure here. This is a screenshot I took. And so this is the structured guide that we're going to be using. We're going to start very simple here because I want to make sure that I show you the entire process. All right, let's get started here. All right, the first thing I'm going to do, let's get rid of this text there. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a VStack as such. This is the main stack where everything is going to be inside there. And then inside here, I'm going to add a horizontal stack. We'll see all of this in action in text. So I'm going to say text, and this is where we're going to say something like quotes. Okay, let's save this Command R to run. And we can see there is, that just says quotes. Very good. So nothing really out of this world at this point. But because we already have all the chops here, technical chops, I'm going to add a font for our text here. And I want this to be a subline. And I want it to be italic as such. And sometimes our code helper here doesn't help, doesn't show. And again, remember, this is still in beta and things may not work as we want them to work, but nevertheless, when they work, they work. I'm going to continue. I'm going to say foreground color is equal to, I'm going to say white. Very good. In fact, let's say orange for now, because if I put white, as you very well know, it's just not going to show anything because we have white background. Also, notice that if you don't save the file as you code, then most likely you're not going to see the code completion as we saw before, right? So now if I say dot, look at that, because I saved. Anyway, small things that perhaps will help you as you continue with SwiftUI. I'm going to close this down there. Okay, so you can take a look, and there it is. There is quotes, looking very nice. But what I want this to say, I want to say quotes available for now. Of course, we're going to append the actual number. So essentially, we're going to add the number dynamically later. Okay, so we have that part done for now. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to add a scroll view. A scroll view, as the name implies, will allow us to actually create this structure here where you can scroll left and right. In fact, the scroll view you will see in a second here allows you to do vertically or horizontally. In this case, we want it to be horizontally scrollable. How do we do that? Well, you may have guessed it. I'm going to go outside of our H stack here. okay, but still inside of our main stack there. And I'm going to say scroll. There we go. There's a scroll view here. And what I'm going to do here, the one thing I'm going to pass is a boolean called shows horizontal indicator, like that, to be false, because I don't want the horizontal indicator to show. What that means is, if we left it the way it is, we'll have this horizontal indicator that tells user that there is stuff to the left and right. We don't want that. That's what we're saying there. Of course, we're not done here because there's so many things we have to do. Now inside here, I'm going to pass an H stack. So now we're going to put stuff inside of our scroll view. So here for now, I'm going to go ahead and add a text. Okay. I say hello there. Save this and give a run. Voila. Now you can see that the quotes went all the way up there and we have hello there showing nicely. Of course, we're not going to see the scroll view because we only have one item here. So I'm going to copy this a few times down there. Save and run. And you can see now, look at this. Now we're able to actually scroll things around. All right. So obviously, instead of copy and pasting all of this for us to be able to see that stuff. So obviously, this is not the best way of doing this, right? Because we just wanted to test and see that indeed things are working, right? Our scroll left and right is working. So we will actually add images later. So what I'm going to do before we go further, I'm going to start putting things into their own struct. So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to create a new struct so I can refactor some code. I'm going to say this is going to be main view. It's a view like that. Say var body. I'm going to say some view and it's going to return something. And of course, I'm going to copy all of this that we have here. In fact, I'm going to cut it and put it all there. And of course, here I'm going to call our main view just like that. Let's save, make sure everything is good. Oh, I think I have an error. No, everything is good. Very good. You can see the result is still the same. At least we know now that we refactor some of our code. Now, the thing about refactoring is that you can refactor forever, right? So at some point we have to say, okay, we are done. All right, very good. So we're going to continue here. Now we're calling our main view, which is this struct here at the top inside of our body, and all is good. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create an array, very simple array. I'm going to name this quotes. So for quotes, I'm going to say the one is going to be quote 1, quote 2. And in a second here, you're going to see that we have a lot of quotes by the magic of editing. And there we go. So now that we have our quotes array, in the next video, we're going to do the same thing we did before, but instead we're going to use a for loop that will allow us to loop through all of these quotes and then create a text view. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a for loop here that will go ahead and fetch each one of these quotes here and put in our view. So what I'm going to do, let's get rid of all of this. And I'm going to, of course, use the for each. There we go, right? And then for the for each, of course, we have to pass something here. What we're going to be passing is self dot quotes. Why self? Because remember, we want to access these quotes, which is a property of our structure at the top here. Now, in some cases, you could go ahead and just say quotes like this, and it's fine. It all works. You can say quotes dot and do all sort of things. But I also like to put append self because it just makes sense and it's good habit, right? So that we know, or anyone else that reads our code will know that this quotes is indeed a property of our structure there, okay? Like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a variable and say quote for each of the quotes that I'm going to get inside of our quotes there. And I'm going to say in, enter. I'm going to just pass a text as such. Now this text here, I want to say, I'll go back down like this. I'm just going to go ahead and pass our quote. Okay, let's save this and run and see what's going to happen, if it will run at all. Right, we have some issues here. It seems like it's not working and it's blaming what we have at the top here. Well, actually the problem, I guarantee, is inside here. Now, whenever we're looping through using an array or some sort of data source, and we want to pass that data into a view, a text view in this case, we need to actually go a little further to identify each of the items that we're getting from our data source. In this case, just a very simple quotes array, so that then each of our data source items inside are identified. Now that's important because then the text then will know how to restructure itself and actually attach the data inside of it. So to fix that, I'm going to say dot identified. Look at that. It says identify value pairs. At the bottom it says here, it returns a collection of identifier value pairs computed on demand by calling getID. So we need to have that. And by what? What is the identity that we're going to identify each of these items by? Well, in this case, it's just going to use self as in each item inside of our quotes array. So I say backslash dot self like that. Aha. The moment you do that, notice that everything looks much better at this point here because the highlighted colors are good. Save this, and sometimes takes a while for our editor to catch up. But if we go ahead and just run this, we should see no problem. Everything should run. And all of a sudden you can see we have the quotes showing there. Okay, and if we want, of course, this quotes there is just a text. And if we want, of course, this, we can say, for instance, font dot headline, something like this. If you run, just to show you that we can do all sort of things now that we have the data that we want. See? Very good. Very good. Obviously, this data source here is going to be a little bit more elaborate as we go in, but at least you can see now how to use it for each and make sure always to also identify each item that we're getting from our data source. We'll see that more in detail. Okay. Now, what we really want to do, again, is to get something like this, right? To create an actual card, if you will, where we can put this image and text and so forth. But we get there. So the first thing we're going to do here is, instead of just having text, of course, how about creating an image? Right. I can come down here and say image. We've seen this before. And I'm going to just pass system name image. Right, and I can just use the default one, a.say square.fill, like that, and I can make it resizable, right? And I'm going to say frame, and I want width to be about 50 and height to be also about 50. Look at this. I save this and run. We should see, hopefully. Look at this. Ah, it's starting to look good. Look at this. Now we can see that we can add images there. Things are changing a little bit. Okay. Even better, how about add all of this inside of a VStack, right? Because we want it to be vertically aligned. So this is what we're constructing, the inside of it. We're going to have an image at the top and then text and maybe some sort of divider and then the name of the author. Right, so I'm going to copy all of this or cut it all and put inside our V there. If you save this and give it a run real quick, you can see now each one has the image at the top and at the bottom we have the quote. Now the good news is I already have the images or the image that we need to add here. So I'm going to just go ahead and copy them in our project here. So click on assets. And I'm going to go and fetch the two images that we're going to be using. And there we go. We have a lily and motivation_BG. So how do we use those images? You know by now we can just go ahead and get rid of this and just call, for instance, one lily like this and run. Now, the problem here is that we forgot to get rid of the system name, because if you say system name, it will infer that you want obviously a system image that has this name Lily, and there's no such thing. So if we just get rid of this, that was my mistake, and run again, we should have no problems. And voila, you can see now we have our image at the top and our code at the bottom. So not exactly this structure here, but you can see we are getting there. All right. Okay, close all of this down. Okay, so we have our stack here, and I don't like this. This size is not good. I'm going to add actually the better size of 100 like this. And what I'm going to do is let's add a clip here. I'm going to say dot, and I'm going to say dot clip shape like this, and I'm going to pass a circle, okay, and dot overlay. And for our overlay here, I'm going to create another circle. I'm going to add a stroke, and for our stroke, I'm going to have a color dot gray. I'm going to add a line width of about, say, 2. All right, there we go. And let me put it all in one line there. I'm going to say dot shadow like this. Pass a radius of about 10. Let's save this and run, see what's going to happen. Look at that. And you can see now our images are looking much, much better. Pretty much just like this. All right. Very good. So we're making good progress here. And the next thing we're going to do, let's make this a little bit bigger. We're going to add this divider here. It turns out that SwiftUI has already this view called divider that will do that for us. That's the beauty of having all of this at our disposal. So I'm going to come down here because it has to be after the quote text. Just say divider. Okay, call it. And while I'm here, I'm going to add another text. And here I'm going to say by author, something like this. Maybe there's more space than, oh, there's no space. There we go. So run. Oh, voila. It's hard to see because everything is really small, and you will see once we magnify everything, this is actually going to be great. So you can see now we have the image, we have the quote, the divider, and by author. Notice because we are inside still of our for each, all of these items are actually showing horizontally because we want the scroll view to not, first of all, not show any horizontal indicator, and it's going to be horizontally stacked. Why? The reason why everything is horizontally stacked there is because we see here, we put everything inside of an H stack. In fact, you can imagine if you say V stack like that, you'll see what's going to happen. It all will render itself vertically like this. All right, which is not what we want. So put that back. All right, very good. In the next video, we are going to continue putting together our user interface here and hopefully move all of this to the middle of the screen because that's where it's supposed to be. Now, if you look at our diagram here, you notice that our author name here is italic. I believe that by now you should know how to change this text, which is where, let's see, this one here to italic. Go ahead and give it a try. Right, we'll just go ahead and say dot italic. That's that. And for font, I'm going to say dot title like this. Okay, there it is. I don't quite like it because it's too big. How about doing something different? We can actually invoke a modifier called customs. I say dot custom like that, and we can pass the string name of the font. And there's a lot of different kind of fonts here, but what we're going to pass is actually what I know, which is Helvetica, new like this. Okay, and I want the size to be about 14. So save and run. Okay, very nice. This is looking really, really good. Let's see how can we move all of these to the bottom there to be in the middle. At this point here, let's go to the main stack, right, in our body here. I'm going to just go ahead and add alignment that would say dot center. And I'm going to get rid of all of this because we don't need to add any of that. One thing we can do to kind of solve our problem for now is we can go ahead and say spacer. We can use a spacer which will take all of the views inside of our main view, our screen, and space them out accordingly, meaning that each of the views will take as much space as it needs. So if I save this, give a run, we'll see something very cool that will happen. All of a sudden, all of the views inside of our V stack, because we have this horizontal stack, and we also have this horizontal stack, which also contains this V stack inside of our scroll view. Let's see what happens if I actually move this to right below our H stack that contains the quotes available. What's going to happen? You'll see there's going to be a hole in the middle, right? There it is. That makes sense. Okay, so that is a spacer that we can use, but we're not going to use that so far. Okay, I'm going to get rid of that. What I'm going to do, actually, we're going to add ourselves another view, which is going to be, let's look at our diagram here, which is going to be this. So we need to add another view. So essentially it's going to be this, a copy of this somewhere here, and then these quotes are going to be below there. Okay. All right, let's take a look here. What are we going to actually do? Let's go to our main, actually content view main here, and we're going to put all of this inside of a V stack like this. Let's get that. So at the top here, I'm going to say image like this, and we're going to pass, let's finalize that, and I'm going to say Lily like this. But you notice something interesting here. The image we are going to be adding here, which is going to be a circular image, it's going to be really the same image as this, right? So we know a little bit about refactoring and we don't want to repeat ourselves. How about factor our image? Meaning, instead of having this there, we can actually cut all of this out and create right at the top here. I'm going to say struct circle image. All right, it's a view type, and then I'm going to say var image name is a string. Okay, and then I'm going to say var body some view that we are going to be returning, and paste all of that in as that. To make it better, I'm going to put inside of v stack. That way we end up not having issues. It's always a good idea to put inside of some sort of a stack. There we go. Circle image now should be good, but notice we are passing an image name there, so I can come down here and I say image name. That's what we're going to be passing, which means coming down here, we can just go ahead and call circle image and pass our image name is going to be Lily like this. Save and run. Nothing will change per se. Actually, nothing really changed in terms of these images that we added, the circular images there, because now we are actually using this circle image jump to here. This is what we're using now. We refactor everything. All we have to do is call this and pass the image name, and life is good. Which means here I can come and say circle image and pass image name, which was Lily. Look how cool this is. Save this now. You will see something amazing happening. The power of refactoring, and voila. All right. But what we want to do also is we want to make sure that there is some padding to this image at the top here, which means the circle image. So I can actually come down here, because remember, everything we're passing around is just a view. Okay, so I can actually invoke modifiers, so to change the behavior and the way things look. I can come here and say, for instance, I'm going to say dot padding like this, and I want the top to have about 150. Save and run. Look at this. The top now has padding of about 150, and I also want the bottom to have some sort of padding. So I can come down here and say dot padding again, so I can call as many times as I want, and I want bottom, okay, to have about 20. Save and run. And voila, so there is nice padding, as you can see there. Notice I can still do all sort of things, because I know, let's say command and click, it will just say, and then click jump to definition, goes to where circle image was defined. Even though we define the frame here inside of our generic image, right, that we are just reusing, the width to be 100, there are times that we actually want to change it, right? We want to differentiate this circle image here from the one we have inside of main. Well, we can still do that. If I come down here and say dot frame, I can override the frame that we had before. I can say width 145 and height of also 145. Look at this. So at this point here, all is good. But let's say for our circle image, I want to make sure that I have different sizes for each instance. For instance, this one here, I want it to be a little bit bigger because it's supposed to be some sort of a logo, right? So I want to make this a little bit bigger. How do I do that? Now we have our circle image here, and inside we have the frame. what we can do is we can actually remove all of these frames. I'm going to just cut all of them out, okay, from our circle image. Remember, this is our struct circle image. And then where we're calling it, which is inside of our content view there, I am actually going to invoke it, right? I'm going to say dot frame like this. I'm going to pass the width. I think I want this one to be 145. And height, I also want it to be 145 like that. And for where we call here, so this is the inside of our stack in our for each, which means it's going to be inside here, right? I'm going to add a different size, which was the size that I had before, which is 100 by 100. Okay, let's give it a little space there. Okay, so now we again made our code a little bit more flexible. Instead of adding, of course, here the frame width and height, we just removed it and called it whatever, and then added where we call each circle image that we need, because we may want different sizes, as you can see here. So if I save this and give it a run real quick, you're going to see a little difference. Aha, see, this is a little bit bigger and this is smaller. I can make this maybe 160. How about that? And run. Voila, much better. It's bigger and it looks much better. And there we go. So we're making really good progress here. We're getting to the point where I think it's getting the time where we can actually hopefully start creating this structure here, right? This nice card with a nice background. Okay, that's what we're going to be doing in the next videos. Okay, it is time now to work on our awesome view, which is this card in the background there. Now, let's understand where exactly this is. If we look in our for each loop here, we have the v stack, and this is where we're calling the image. We have the quote, we have the divider, and the by author. So that means then, in order for us to have what we're looking for, which is this, it has to be enclosed inside of our v stack. Now, because it's just a view, we can go ahead and call modifiers here, right? So I can say dot. Look at that. Let's start with a frame. I want to have a frame width of about 300 and a height of also 300. And then once I have that width, I'm going to put a foreground color. I lost my code. Say dot. I want to be gray. Okay. And then I'm going to use a padding of about 4 like this. And foreground, it means what it means. That means the color in front. Now the background, I can say background. I want this to have color of white. All right, let's go ahead and save and give it a run, see what's going to happen. Right, now it's hard to see because the colors are not helping. We say here that our foreground is going to be gray and then the background is going to be white. Let's change this to something more extravagant here. Let's say orange, Command R, and voila. Just like that, we have a very nice user interface here. Now it's a little bit extravagant, but at least you can see that we're getting there. Now the question here is, how about make these sides, you can see the sides of our rectangles here, they're really sharp. How do we make them smoother and add a little bit of corner? You've seen that before. Well, you can go ahead and say corner radius like that. And I'm going to say I want this to be about 8. And while I'm here, I'm going to add an overlay because we're going to overlay something on top of that. Okay. So what is it I'm going to be overlaying? I'm going to overlay a rectangle here. Now we will see how this all works. I'm going to say rectangle. Look at that. We don't even have to create our own rectangle. Now this rectangle here, I want to fill it with something. Now let's go ahead and just give a color of this rectangle. Say dot color, in this case foreground color. I want to say dot blue. And these colors are all very intentionally extravagant so we can actually see what's going on. Right away you see that it took over everything. Well, because we actually said foreground is going to be now blue. So foreground is everything that is overlaid. In fact, we put inside of our overlay a rectangle that it has that color. So that's not what we want. And also notice that we can't quite see the corner radius that we asked for. That's because we need to clip it. So if I come down here outside, I'm going to say dot clipped like this, save and run. You also notice that we don't see our radius showing there, the corners that we wanted them to be kind of smooth with a radius. We'll see how to fix that in a second. Let's go ahead and change the way this looks, because now we're just overlaying something on top of our text, and that's not good. How do we solve this? Well, we have to finish what we're doing here. So what I need to do, in fact, instead of putting a foreground here, that is not what we need, I need to put a fill. A fill allows us to actually fill a shape with the foreground color. But this fill is different because we can actually add things inside of our fill, right? Inside of our fill, I can add a gradient, but particularly I'm going to add a linear gradient. The linear gradient will allow us to have something like this. You see how this looks? Yes. It starts at one color and gradually, linearly changes to a different color. That's what we're trying to do here. So how do we do that? Say linear gradient like this, hit enter, and it gives exactly what we need to pass, all the arguments we need to pass. The first thing is the gradient, the actual gradient object. Well, I'm going to say gradient as such. Now for our gradient, we need to pass a few parameters as well, because the gradient allows us to go from color A to a different color. So what are the parameters are we going to pass? So these parameters are going to be an array, because you can see they're going to be type color, and we have our square brackets there. So what array am I going to pass here? I'm going to go ahead and pass a few colors here. I'm going to say, first of all, it's just going to be clear. Clear is indeed a color, right? And then I'm going to go to some sort of pinkish. Okay, very good. Now that we have that, we need to pass the start point. Where do we want to start this gradient? Well, we want to start this somewhere, and this somewhere is going to be a dot center. We want the gradient to start in the middle, and the end point is got to be top leading. Now, there's different points we can choose. There's top leading, trailing, and so forth. Let's go with top leading for now. Okay? And then what I'm going to do here outside of our fill, I want to make sure that this fill is clipped. I'm going to say dot clipped like that. It says clips the view to its bounding rectangular frame. That's exactly what we want. And then what we're going to do, I'm going to add a shadow. I'm going to say shadow like this. We have passed radius. I'm going to say about 8. Okay, so save this and give it a run. Let's see what's going to happen. And just like that, we have this very nice gradient happening there. Of course, this is not the color we want. We're going to change that color to white so that it looks exactly what we had here, right? Of course, you can change to whatever you want. It's just a preference, really. And let's see what else is looking. And you can see now we do have to our sides, at least the size that we want, clipped. We have our nice border radius there looking good. Now, if I change this corner radius to perhaps maybe bigger, let's say 13, you'll see they should be rounder. Okay? So you can play around with that at your own time. That's not a problem. Very good. So we're making really awesome progress. So we overlay everything with this rectangular gradient. So we say rectangle. Inside of rectangle, we pass in a fill, right? To fill everything with something. What is this something? It's going to be a linear gradient. In fact, if there is a linear gradient, that means there's other kind of gradients, right? But in this case, we just chose linear, and it's very intuitive. It says, okay, if it's linear gradient, we have to pass a few arguments, parameters here. First one is going to be a gradient. What colors really we have to pass? We said we want clear and pink. Those are two colors that we're going to morph from and to. The starting point is going to be from the middle. The end point is going to be top leading. Top leading meaning to the left. Okay, because it's leading left. Trailing is always to the right. Okay, that's it. And then we clipped, and then we pass in the shadow because we want to have a nice radius shadow showing. All right. The next thing we're going to do now is to add an image to this whole background here. So that again mimics exactly what we have in our screenshot. So at this point, you know that we added a few images earlier. go back to assets there, we have this image here, right? That is the image we're going to be using called motivation_bg. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, where do we add our background image? We have to understand the root of everything, right? Let's go to our body where everything has been called. This is our content view, right? So we have our view and we have vStack. So we are calling the circular image and the main view. So this vStack here is indeed what's holding everything, right? So naturally, we could add a background to that vStack. So what I'm going to do, in fact, I'm going to say dot, say background. Notice the background, you pass in a view. So as you know, everything is a view, right? So the view I'm going to pass here is going to be an image because an image is a view. I'm going to say image like that. And I want to pass a title of this image or name of this image. It's going to be motivation_bg. Remember, it has to be exactly the same name as what we named our image. Exactly. If you don't have it exactly, then we're going to have issues. Okay, so we have our image there. And then what I'm going to do is, in fact, let me just put this in a new line so perhaps it's easier for you to see, for now at least. And then for this image, I'm going to make this resizable. Of course, this is something you should always do. Okay, let's save this and see what's going to happen. Let's run. And voila. Just like that, we changed everything. Now, we have a little problem here because they're cut off to the bottom here and at the top. To fix that, we are going to actually say the rendering mode, we want it to be original. So dot original, save and run. It's going to go ahead, hopefully, and get everything originally situated. But that doesn't really solve our problem innately. Well, what's going to solve our problem is we want to make sure that this whole background, this whole view here, expands itself over this area here. This is what we call the safe area, right? So we can do that. We can force the operating system to say, you know what, whatever we are showing there, just go overboard. Just fill out everything. We don't need to worry about this safe area. This is what we call safe areas of our phone. So I can come down here outside of our vStack here, which contains all of the items. So I'm going to say dot edges ignore safe area and hit enter. And it says what edges. So I can actually go ahead and say dot. I can ignore the bottom and I can ignore leading. There are all these enumerations that we can actually use. I want all, meaning everything that needs to be ignored, it will be ignored. So I'm going to save and run again. And just like that, you're going to see that now it looks much, much, much better. All right. Very good. All right, so I hope this is still getting you excited and seeing the possibilities here. It doesn't take really much to create amazing user interfaces with SwiftUI. Obviously, there are still things to do here. And one thing I'm going to ask you to do is to change this hideous color here to white. Because now that we have a nice background, we can afford to change to actually white so you can see the difference here, right? Where would you do that? Well, that's your challenge. Go ahead and change this background of this card here, see, to white. All right, I'll see you in the next video. So I hope you were able to change this hideous color to white. And where would you do that? Well, we can go down to where we say orange here. I'm going to change this to, if I can type, of course, white, save and run. And just like that, we have this beautiful, awesome gradient that looks exactly like our original application. Okay, you can see there it is. Very good. Let's change these quotes available also to, and change this color here because we actually want this to be white. Okay, we're going to change, of course, we're going to add dynamically the number of quotes that we have. Okay, so at this point here, seems like we are done with the user interface. Well, let me go ahead and give a final run for now so we can see the fruits of our work. There we go. I can go ahead and scroll. It's looking really, really good. All right. So like I said, I think we're pretty much done with our user interface here. So what we're going to be doing next, of course, is look at creating the actual data that will allow us to have the actual quote and the author. Again, just like our application, right? That is the idea here. For now, we have our quotes as our data source. So this is not scalable, and it was just for us to have some sort of data so we can start seeing things in our app. What we really want to do is we want to create a structure that will support our applications. So whenever we are creating our application, this is how we have to think. We have to create the data side of things which supports our app. Okay? Now, the thing about programming is that there are times when we want to do things that just work. Okay? In most of the cases, that's what we do when we're just learning and so forth. But there are times when we want to go beyond things that just work. Perhaps we want to follow some sort of framework or paradigm that will help us and other people who may be working with us in a particular project to build something actually strong. Okay? All I'm trying to say here is we need to separate the data part of things so that the application doesn't really care where it's getting the quotes from. At this point, it really doesn't care. If I were to create another file that perhaps goes and gets quotes from a database or from a file, this application here, this whole user interface should not care where the data comes from. As long as there's some integrity with the data, it should not care. So that's what we're going to be doing here. But we're going to do slowly. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have to create a struct or a class per se that will be our model. Because a quote, let's go back to our diagram. A quote has two things. It will have the actual quote and the author. So we're going to create a model which will model one quote. That way we can attach it to a data and then we can show in our application. Okay? So let's go ahead and create inside of our quotes here. Say right click. I'm going to create a new file. And this file here is just going to be a Swift file. So say Swift file, not SwiftUI, although you could make it, but let's just make a Swift file. Next, I'm going to call this quote because this will represent one quote instance. So I'll say okay. Very good. So we have our foundation import here. So we have foundation here, which is another Apple framework that has all sort of things that we'll need to create extractor, to create classes and everything in all the basics for our applications. All right. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create a struct, and this struct I'm going to call a quote, and it's going to be like that. And then I'm going to create the properties. So for each quote, I'm going to have a property called quote, which is going to be of type string like that. Okay. I'm going to create another one called name. I'm going to also be a string. Okay. That's it for now, at least. Once we have that, in fact, I don't like this to be at the bottom. It doesn't really matter, but I like to move it to be somewhere there. Okay. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to right click that and I'm going to create a new group with folder. In this group, I'm going to call model, hit enter, and I'm going to add that to that model there. Okay. So what this does is just organizes our code. So we will always know that, okay, all of our model classes are going to be inside of model. Very good. Let's go back to our quotes here. So what we need to do next is back to our main. I call it main, but it's our content view, right? Which is this file here. What we need to do inside of our main here is we're going to, instead of having these quotes like this, I'm going to go ahead at this point here and comment this out. I'm going to create another variable. I'm going to say var quotes. In this case, is going to be equal to an array of quote objects like that. Okay. I'm going to say var quotes is going to be containing a type that will contain an array of quote objects. Okay. And for now, I'm just going to go ahead and create an array containing quotes. I'm going to say quote, which will have a string of quotes. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and say something like whatever the mind of man can conceive, right? And for the string, which is going to be the name of the author, we're going to put James Bond. Okay, this is just an example. And I'm going to create a few of these. So I'm going to copy that, paste in a few times. So it's all the same. That's no problem at all. I just want to get you thinking here in these terms, okay? In fact, I'm going to get rid of this last one there. We don't need to have that. And right there, we notice that we have an issue here. Let's click here. It talks about the expression is ambiguous without more context. Like I've mentioned before, some of these errors may be a little bit hard to decipher per se. So what's happening here is very simple. Now that we've changed our quotes from what we had before, very simple, just an array and change it to an array containing data type of quote, so object of type quote, things are not quite working as we were expecting. One of the main reasons is at this point here, when you say quotes that identify by, you can no longer say the ID that we want to identify by .self, because now we're talking about objects that we're passing inside here. And Swift and SwiftUI, they're very tricky in that they're like, okay, we need to change the way we identify here because it's not just a simple array of some sort. In fact, if you come here and say dot, look at that. You can identify by name or by quote. Let's give it a try with by name. Let's save that. And really nothing has changed. Now, before we move forward here, let's change a few things that we have here. First of all, I'm going to move these quotes inside of main view up to, and I'm going to put that inside of our content view because this is where everything will be called first. Okay, like that. And then here, I'm just going to go ahead and pass a var quotes. It's going to be a quote type array. And then it's going to be an array that will contain quotes like that. Okay, so what we're doing here is we know that this main view here, we're actually passing it to be rendered inside of a content view. So this is the first thing or first place that everything happens. Therefore, it's a good idea at this point at least to put all the quotes in here, the actual quotes, let's just say there, and then call inside of our body here the main view. But now we have a problem because the main view, we said that it needs quotes. That's why we have to pass quotes like this. What quotes? It's going to be the quotes array at the top there. Save that and give a quick run. We still failed. Where is the problem? Let's come down here. So if we change this instead of self to name, could it be name or quote? And down here, if I go down and say dot, I'm going to go ahead and force and say name. Notice now everything is highlighted, which means everything is good. If I save this, give a quick run, we should be able now to see, voila. So it's getting all the names. And if I want the quotes, I can say that quotes, or I think it was, what is the name? Let's see. We have quotes and name. We have quote and name. Yes, that's right. We want quote. So this quote here is indeed the property of our object. Give it a run, and we should be able to see all of the quotes, even though they're all the same as we added all of them manually. All right. This can be a little bit tricky, especially if you're a beginner, because you're thinking, okay, what's going on? Let's go into recap. Because we're inside of a content view, this is the first thing that is run, right? Whenever you hit run in our application here, it's going to go and look here. Well, when it looked here, it's going to say, oh, there is quotes. That is good. Very nice. But even before that, goes ahead and calls this view here, this body, as we know, the first thing that runs. And then it's going to go and render everything, and then it's going to find the main view. Well, the main view, command click, let's go to jump to definition. The main view here, it says, well, this is where we go through and get all the quotes and put all of them on the screen. Because we have for loop here, we have to, of course, identify our items inside of our array containing quote objects. But for that to happen, of course, we have to create a property which needs to be passed, because we put it here, has to be passed whenever we go ahead and invoke the main view, which is exactly what's happening when we do here. So we have to pass the actual quotes. What quotes in this case? These quotes here. We're passing in there, and then it goes ahead and does everything that it needs to do, which means now in our for loop, we're able to go and get all the quotes named and the actual quotes. That's why you're able to see the quotes like that. All right, very good. So now we're moving into getting things dynamically in the proper way. Okay, so we created a model class called quote. and we're representing what a quote is. A quote will have a quote, the actual quote, and the name of the person, right? And then we go back to our content view here. We actually create all of the quotes first. Doesn't matter when you do it, but we create the actual quotes inside of a content view so that whenever it's ready to run, then the content view will have it. There's other ways to do this, but for this example, this is how we're going to be doing. Because then we're calling the main view inside of this body here, and we pass the quotes, which then will know what to do with it. In this case, we're just getting the actual quote or name. But most importantly, remember, we no longer are allowed to identify each quote by .self, because .self is too generic, so it has to be specific. And we have the specifics now. Why? Because now we have a quote as an object, right? It's a struct, which means we create objects of quote through our model data. That's why we have to either put the name, that's the ID for each quote we get, or we could have put a quote there. Generally speaking, all of these items, all of these models usually should have some sort of an ID, okay? But in this case here, we're not going to complicate things. We're just going to create something simple so you can take a look and go from there. All right, very good. I know I threw a lot to you here, but I hope this wasn't as complicated as it may sound. Okay, go ahead and play around with this concept here. And in the next video, what we're going to be doing is we are going to change this to make it less manual, even though now things are a little bit more dynamic, but we actually had to create each code ourselves. The idea is to have a file with all the quotes so that we can just plug them in and then we can see in our application. All right, so far this is what we have. It's working wonderfully. Of course, not with the actual data, but we can see the skeleton is here and it's really looking good. When we start dealing with data, there's a lot of things we need to consider. Data can be fetched and come in different forms, but one of the most popular and most recommended form that data should be consumed as is what we call JSON or JSON, depending on where you are. People tend to have different pronunciation, but I call it JSON because that's how I learned it to say. So JSON, what is this? JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Now you may say, well, JavaScript, I may have heard of JavaScript. JavaScript is another programming language that it's vastly used in the web, but also across other platforms. Now, the reason why JavaScript object notation is what is preferable and that's what's used is it's because of its simplicity and the fact that the data presented follows a certain structure that is JavaScript object-oriented notation. Meaning that it's faster to transfer through network, right? Because if you have an application and you want to fetch data from an API, something outside your application, it's easy to transfer that data or to fetch that data via JSON as opposed to trying other means. So JavaScript object notation JSON is the way to go. Here's how it looks. This would be a very valid JavaScript object notation or a JSON format. I believe one of the reasons why they call it JavaScript object notation is because in JavaScript, this is one way of creating actual objects. Okay? So it represents a JavaScript object notation, hence JSON. Now, looking at this structure here, you see we have the braces there. You should know by now, braces allow us to create chunks of statements inside. In this case, it's just a JavaScript object. But you could also argue that this object notation here, it is indeed an object, but it should also remind you of another structure in Swift language, for instance. If you notice closely here, you can see that there's two things that are important to understand or to remind ourselves of. There is the user ID, colon, and then there's an ID, colon, and one, title, and then colon, and then something, completed, and false. Now, what does this remind you of? There is a relationship between user ID, what's on the left, with what's on the right. Right, this is what we call a dictionary, right? There is this key value pair relationship here. So that means then, in this notation here, it is easier for us to actually structure our data, right? A user has an ID, so whenever we want a user ID, we just call the user ID and we receive one. If we want the title, we just call the notation dot title, and then we get the actual value. So this is a very simple JSON data that can be parsed for us to get the information that we want from our data structure here. So what we're going to do next is we are going to use a JSON file, which will contain all of the quotes that we want to retrieve from that file and show that in our application. In fact, this is the way that most applications that we create or that we use even function. So if you are using an application on your phone that needs to connect to the internet, what it does is it actually connects to an API, essentially a database somewhere else remotely, right? And then fetches that data in. Most likely the data that it fetches is actually in this format. Okay, enough talking. Let's go ahead and see how can we transform our current application here so that it can actually use a JSON file, extract the data. In this case, we'll extract the quotes, and then we can display them. So back to our project here, our quotes project. So far, we have been using this quotes data class that we created, or model class, I should say, and we create manually a few quotes and we add it to our array and everything should be working fine. Let's go ahead and give it a run just to make sure and see that indeed everything is working. Take a few seconds here. And voila. So at this point, we're getting all of these example quotes that we created, right? So we can slide left, go back to the right, and so forth. That's very good. But as we talked before, this is not scalable. And of course, this is not the way we should ever do it because we are hard coding things. And of course, that is not good. So what we're going to do next is I already have a file, a JSON file that we're going to add to our project. And then we're going to learn how to extract that JSON file from our project that we have internally here so that we can get all of the quotes that are contained in that JSON. Now I already have that file, so I'm going to just copy the file and add it to our project here. So I'm going to go ahead and drag, and I'm going to drop it somewhere there. I'm going to say copy items if needed, say finish, and there we go. Now we have this quotes.json. And notice it says .json, the extension is JSON, because it is indeed a JSON file. And you can see any other file here, it says .swift. You also notice that even though we are talking about SwiftUI, any file that we have, even content view, it just ends with .swift, not SwiftUI, because SwiftUI is indeed a framework, meaning a bunch of classes and libraries that allows us to create applications declaratively, as you can see here. Okay, small distinctions there. Okay, so what we're going to do here, actually, I'm going to add this inside of its own group. Let's see. I'm going to say new group from selection, like that, and I'm going to call this group, I'm going to say, let's say data. Okay, very good. It's nice to organize our code just like we did with the model. Very good. As you can see here, like I said, this is our JSON. Okay, you clearly see that our JSON is actually included inside of an array. I know this because at the top here, we have a square bracket, which means at the end, if I scroll down, I should also end with a square bracket. That's just an array containing objects, JSON object notation. There we go. So this is indeed an object which will contain a key quote, which has, in this case, our quote, and then the name. It's going to be the actual name of the person who wrote it or said it. Okay, so you can see we have over 408 lines of code here. We have a lot of quotes. Can you imagine trying to write this down ourselves? That would not be fun. Very good. So we have all of this. It's now time for us to figure out how do we then go ahead and invoke it all inside here so that we can then show all the quotes in our app. Now, inside of our data group here, I'm going to right click. I'm going to add a new file inside here. So say file. I'm going to add a Swift file. Click there. And this one I'm going to call data, just like that. You'll see in a second why. All right, so there we go. We have a new file and we have this import foundation, which is just another framework that has all of these different classes and things that we can use to create our apps. You can see here, it says import foundation. Again, this foundation here is Apple framework that has all the functions, classes that will give us more features that we need for us to create our applications and so forth. Okay. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to say import like that, and I'm going to import the UI kit as well, like this. Okay, that's another framework as well. Now what I'm going to do here next is I'm going to say I'm going to say quote data. It's going to be of type, remember, it's going to contain type array that will contain quote types. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to load this quote data with this method called load, like this. And this method, I will pass something inside of this method. And to pass, what is it that we're going to be loading? Well, we're going to load our file, which is our quotes. I'm going to call this quotes.json. Remember, it has to be the same name as it is here, says quotes.json, exactly the same, because it needs to know exactly what is the name of the file. Now I have a problem here because we actually have to create this load here. Now, because I already have the code that does all of that for us, I'm not going to bore you in writing the code. I'm just going to go ahead and get code and put here and explain real quick. And there we go. We can see now we have this load function here. Now, there's a lot of code here that may not be very familiar to you. What we're doing here, very simply, we're creating a function called load, and we're passing what we call a generic. A generic is a class that is very generic, as the name implies, which means it's flexible. So whenever we are in situations where we want to create a structure of a class that we don't really want to attach it to a specific type or what it does, we can just pass some sort of a very flexible, generic, not conforming entity. That's what a generic is. So we're saying here, load, we have to pass a T of some type that we can specify anytime. In this case here, that is the type, a T variable, and then we're going to pass, as you can see here, the name of the file name. Okay, that's just what we did here. In this case also, you notice that we are also returning a T type, which means it's just a generic type. Whatever is it that we will return from this function, it will work. Doesn't matter if it's another function or string or int, doesn't matter. It doesn't care. Okay. And of course, inside we are creating this data, which is a variable of type data. And next, what we're doing here is just looking for the actual resource to where this bundle is. Now, the other thing I did, which I shouldn't do, I should move our data Swift to actually model instead of putting inside of data. Let's move this. I'm going to just put there to model like this. So that is much better. Okay. And there's more things going on here. In this case here, we have this file variable that goes and gets the URL, meaning where the file is located, because it needs to go and figure out where the quotes.json, in this case, could have been something else. Where is it located in our project? That's all it's doing. And as it does that, it makes sure that, okay, if something goes wrong, it's going to send us an error saying, okay, this is not working, and so forth. Okay. Now, if all goes well, we're going to actually go ahead and use a JSON decoder. So a JSON decoder is a class that decodes, meaning it goes and looks for our quotes JSON and says, okay, this is indeed a JSON, which means I can go and start fetching one of these each items, right? Each one of these fields and map them with the class or the data class. That's all we're doing. That's why we were returning the decoder and decode this data, which we should have, remember this data here, from our file, which is a JSON. So I know there's a lot of code here. I don't want you to get stressed out if this makes no sense. Just remember this load function, all it does is checks to see where our quotes JSON lives, okay? And once the JSON file is found, it goes ahead and translates all of this mess, quote unquote, and makes it all look nice so that we can then put all of that inside of our quote struct. Okay. Now you notice there's another problem here. It says global function load requires that quote, right, conform to decodable. What this means is because we are actually going to decode, we can pass here a decodable because we say here in the load, we're going to pass some sort of generic object or variable that has to be decodable, meaning that these quote objects that we're passing in, they have to be able to be a little more flexible so that when we decode our JSON, they're able then to actually match, if that makes any sense. So what we have to do here is just go to quotes, and here we are going to say extends, or it will conform to decodable like that. If you save this, go back to data, let's save, let's go ahead and run to see. Everything should be good by now. No more errors. Of course, nothing really happened, but at least we know that everything is working. All we had to do was to change our code to conform to a decodable protocol to say, okay, this quote here, it's okay, can be decodable because all of the quotes are going to be loading. It requires it to be decodable. All right. All right, there we go. So we have this set up for now, at least. So the next thing we need to do is to be able to go back to our content view and get rid of this array that we hand-coded, because now we want to be able to use our data, that's Swift, this quote data, which we'll have at this point here, all of the quotes, these quotes ready to be shown in here. And we'll do that in the next video. So back here inside of our content view, I can come down here. Let's go ahead and comment this out. I'm going to recreate a new one. Remember, we're inside of content view. I'm going to go ahead and say var again, say quotes, just like we had before. And I want to, of course, for these to contain quotes like this. Save this. Everything is good. Nothing is breaking. That's really good. And also at this point, let's go ahead and run this, see what's going to happen. Run. And it looks like we have a problem. You can see here says 1 and exclamation mark. Let's click on that. Right. It says missing argument for parameter quotes and call scene delegate Swift. What is this? Let's click on this. If you click there, it takes you back to our scene delegate.swift. What this means is very simple. So the problem here is the moment that we run our application, go back to content view. Remember, content view is the first place that our compiler looks for things in order for it to show in our user interface. Okay? If that's the case, it goes and looks at these quotes and says, okay, I'm expecting to receive something here. What is this something? Is the quotes parameter that we need to pass. Because remember, this is just a class struct. So this is indeed a property. So the content view is a little bit confused at this point. When that happens, our scene delegate is the one that is responsible for delegating things that needs to be done or things that the views or structs need to receive in order for them to function. So that's why we have a problem here. So the scene delegates is able to control and create the window, which is this window here. Oh, we can't quite see yet, but this window when our application runs. As you can see here, we created this window, which is what we see the first time we run an application and all that stuff. But the root view controller needs some information because we said that the root view controller is going to be a content view, which is this guy here, content view. However, our content view requires something. Why? Again, because we said the property for this content view is quotes, which means we need to initialize these quotes with something. We need to tell it, okay, the quotes property will require an array full of quotes. That's why if you click at the stop sign here, as I call it, it's going to say we need to pass something. If you just say fix, look at this. It went ahead and passed the parameter quotes, which is type exactly that we wanted, with the type of stuff or of information that we need, which is an array of quote object. That means here, now we need to pass what we need to pass, which is quote data, right? This quote data here, let's go back to, is what we created up here. Because this quote data here contains all of our JSONs. So we need to pass it inside of our scene delegate because it requires the parameters of quotes, right? Which is an array. Is that correct? Right? So we go back down here. Indeed, that's what we set it to do. That's all. Now let's save this and give it a run and see if we end up with any errors. We shouldn't. And the moment you do that, look at this. Now you can see we're actually getting the correct quotes. You see all of these? In fact, I will show you. If we go to quotes, let's see, life isn't about, let's compare all of that. Go to the first one. Indeed, life isn't about getting and having. Of course, we have issues not showing everything, but we're going to fix that later. So you can see it's now getting all of the correct ones. Whatever, that's quote whatever. Oops, I went too far. Let's go to strive, strive not to, two roads, and so forth. So this is actually working. Keep going. It's now feeding off our code JSON, and it's all working perfectly. Notice the cool thing here. The cool thing is that we didn't have to change much. All we had to change was the source of the data. First of all, we created this source ourselves because we want to test things out. Now, all I had to do is just create this parameter here, empty, and make sure that inside of our, in this case, of course, inside of our scene delegate, we are passing our data. As you can see, there we go. And just like that, life is good. And of course, we had to create the data.swift here, which goes and actually put all the data inside of the array. So we pass that into our scene delegate and life is good. Just like that, everything is working perfectly. at least the retrieval and parsing of the JSON, right? Which means if we go back down, let's see, where are we? So this is where we go through all the quotes. In this case, we say by name. We could have said by whatever else. And then here we say quote that quote because that's what we're getting. We're just getting the quote. If I come here and say that name, what do you think is going to happen? Let's run this one time. We should see just names showing. Look at that. All the names are showing now. But what we want really is to keep the quotes like that. And here we're just going to go ahead and add the author. So I'm going to say interpolation there. I'm going to say quote object dot name. Now run this. We should be able to see exactly the correct quote with the correct name. Look at this. Life isn't. That's Kevin Cruz. That's Albert Einstein. If I scroll all the way, all this Babe Ruth, and so forth. Now that we get the data, it's easier for us to do whatever we want with the data, because the most important part is actually being able to get the data. And then once we get the data, we can do all sort of things. But I want you to pay attention to the process that we took here, which is very important because we're separating those two things here. The user interface, which all of these that users see we've been working on, should not be dependent on knowing exactly where the data comes from. It has no idea. In fact, we could have created another entity that gets data from a local database or somewhere else on the web. It does not matter where the data comes from. All the user interface is supposed to do is to display that data. How that happens, it shouldn't know and it should not matter. We know that is true because as I show you here, first of all, this data earlier we did this way and it worked, and now we did the correct way because we're getting the data from an actual JSON file and it works just like that. At this point, really all we have left to do is to make this look much better, meaning we want this to look more like this. So the text actually shows up, and of course we're going to add the number of quotes that are available, and that we're going to do in the next video. Let's start with something very simple here. Let's go ahead and get the actual quotes number, meaning the number of quotes that we have in our JSON. How do we do that? Well, we know that our quotes here, quotes variable property, it's an array, meaning it's an array that contains objects of quote. So arrays, they do have a property called count. The count, it just tells us how many items are inside of this array. So we're going to take advantage of that and add the count or how many quotes we have in our JSON file. Let's go down to our view that we created here, main view. We have access to that as well. And let's see. So here where we say text quotes available, we can just go ahead and pass our quotes here, interpolation. And I'm going to say quotes, or just say self, whatever we want. Self.quotes.count. Look at that. Can get all the count, give it a little space there, and you can see 102 quotes available. All right, and just like that, we added our number there. The next thing we're going to work on is the text, the actual quote. You see it truncates itself there, meaning because default space is very limited and we need to force it so that we can actually see the entire quote. To do that, we're going to go to our quote, because this is where we're actually getting the quote, and we're going to add a few other modifiers here. I'm going to say dot. There's one that called multi-line text alignment. That's what we want. So it tells us exactly how do we want this text to be aligned, right? The whole line, how do we want it to be? I'm going to say I want it to be dot leading, meaning to the left. That just means whenever we see everything, it's all going to be to the left. Now, this is not very apparent at this point because everything is centered, but you will see at a later time. Very good. And the next thing I want to do is I'm going to say dot line limit. We're going to pass here the number of lines that will be the limit before we cut the text off. Let's go ahead and say 50. Save and run. See what's going to happen. If we do that, all of a sudden you can see now it is showing the whole text, because now we say the maximum lines that we are allowing this view to hold is going to be 50. Well, we have 2, so we're still good. In fact, 50 is probably too much. I could say probably 10 and still be okay. But since we don't know exactly the data that we're getting, it's always a good idea to put more lines so that the text doesn't get truncated. Right? Go back to 50 we can play around with that. The next thing we're going to do, let's make sure we have enough space here. So we are all inside of this V stack. There's this V stack that ends right about here. Very good. But we have this main horizontal stack, which ends, I would say, right about there. Okay. So what I'm going to do, let's go ahead and add a padding. So I'm going to say that padding like that. And I want just to say deleting padding like this, just say dot lead. So the left edge, I want to have about 9 padding. If you run, this is just for us to start putting things into perspective here. So you can see there's a little padding leading there. All right. So it looks like we have done a lot of good work here. So the next thing we need to do, let's go ahead and look at our mockup here. Let's see, we have our image. What we're going to do next is want to make sure we have our quotes inside of double quotes like that, okay? So that we can give it a little bit more pizzazz. And also want to say by dash and then the name of the person. So we're going to do some interpolation here. Now let's start with the actual quote. So in this case here, we want to put around the quote, like we said before, we want to put inside of a quote there. Now, you notice that's not going to work because if we just go ahead and try to put quotes like this and put another quote, something like that, it's just not going to work because the interpolation is just going to be confused and doesn't know what's going on. So we need to be able to escape a few of these quotes and add quotes so that whenever the compiler look at this text, it will know, okay, this quote here is for the actual interpolation and this is the actual quotes that we want for users to see. To do that, we'll have to do something. It's not too complicated. We just have to understand what's happening. So we're going to go outside of our first quote there. I'm going to put the pound sign like that and put the quote. So that would signify the quote that comes afterwards. We're going to actually show to the user. And then we're going to put another quote inside, which is going to be the quote that we want to use for interpolation, meaning we want to get the actual quote, that name. But we need to finish that with another quote like this, and finish with our pound like this. But before that, we actually have to come down here right before our backslash there and put another pound like this. And then we're going to go ahead and finalize by adding quotes and then finish with pound. Okay, this just differentiates what is going to be shown for the user to see the actual quotes and what is indeed string interpolation inside there. In fact, we don't need this space here. I can just put all close there. Okay, so we start with pound and quote, and we end with quote and pound to finish our double quote that will be shown. And make sure to put right after our backslash, we put backslash, and then we put the also pound sign like that. All right. And that's that. Let's run this, and we should have our application loads, and voila. Oh, I put it in the wrong place. I put here in the Kevin Cruise. Ha, you probably saw that. All right, I'm going to just go ahead and Command Z all of this. I put in the wrong place. I should have put here. That's where I was supposed to put all of that. So let's do it again, like that, and then like this, and there we go. Save and run. Should be having that in the right place. And what I can see now, we have the actual quotes, but also the double quotes. That's what I mean. Okay, they're showing there. That's not necessary, but that's just something to give it a little bit of pizzazz, if you will. Okay, so the next thing we are going to do is to add the by. So here I'm going to say something like by dash, and it says here by Kevin Cruz, by Napoleon Hill, and keep going. And voila, you can see even when we have a lot of text, everything kind of shrinks together and redirects and restructure everything so that our text can actually show up. Very nice. We have our gradient and we have 102 of these. So you can keep going and read them if you wish to do so. And that's it, my friends. We're able to build from scratch this very awesome quotes application here. Now, there's a lot of things that we learn along the way. So what I want you to do as an exercise is to search online for JSON files of all sort of things. There's jokes, there is other quotes, there is anything that you can find, and try to replicate what we just did here, okay? But what I want you to do, because now you know more about putting things together, the user interface and so forth. I want you to play around with that. Figure out how to change things around, like the gradient. We used linear gradient for this example, but there might be other kind of gradients. Do some research. Figure out if there is another one and try to use that in your application. So go ahead and build something. Keep learning and you will get better and better and better. I'm very excited and I can't wait to see you in the next videos.